Hello, everyone, and welcome to Up Your Security Game 10 Best Practices for Secure Backups. Today's webinar is sponsored by Veeam and produced by Actual Tech Media. Now, I am Keith Ward. I am with Actual Tech Media, as you might have assumed, and I'm truly excited to be your moderator for today's special event. But before we get to that, I do need to go over some housekeeping items here. First up, ask lots of questions today, folks. This is a learning opportunity for you. And in fact, Veeam is going to be joining us live during this event in that questions window to answer your questions as they come in. So make sure you're answering lots of questions. And in that spirit, I have a question for all of you to try using that questions window yourselves. Here's what I want to know. How far along are each of you on your Christmas shopping journey this year? As for myself, I'm at the barely begun stage. Let me know where you are. Are you a little bit further along? Are you still waiting to even get started? Do you wait until Christmas Eve? Just let me know. And let's start this discussion right now. Now, that Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues you might be experiencing. First thing you want to do if you have trouble seeing or hearing anything is a browser refresh. That'll fix most of the problems that you have. If that doesn't work, let us know in that Q&A, and we will provide further technical assistance. Okay, next to that questions tab is the handout section. And there you will find some great resources, starting with a PDF overview of the Veeam data platform. Now, this is a free handout provided by Veeam that you can and you should download ASAP. In that handout section, you will also find links to the Gorilla Guide Book Club, where you can get access to our vast library of books on technology topics, many, in fact, most of which were edited by yours truly. You will also find a link to the Actual Tech Media Events Center there, which has our calendar of upcoming events. A lot of really good looking sessions are coming up. Check them out. And if you see something you like, hey, sign up for another one after the event is over today. All right. Third, at the end of this webinar, we are going to be giving away a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Now, you do have to be in attendance during the entire live event to qualify for the prize. Official terms and conditions of the prize drawing can be found in your handouts section. And finally, as I mentioned before, we want to encourage those questions, especially today during this live Q&A. So we have a special additional prize to get those questions from you. We're going to give away another Amazon gift card, this one for $50 for the best question. That's all you have to do is ask a question. If yours is what we deem is the best one, we will send you $50. How about that? Pretty easy. So just keep those questions coming throughout the event. So at the end, we're going to pick the best question. We're going to contact that prize winner, and then we're going to get them the prize. And so with that, everyone, we are ready for the main event today. It is truly an honor to introduce you to our presenters today. Rick Vanover, he's a Senior Director of Product Strategy with Veeam, and Rick is someone I have known for a really long time. He used to write for me, in fact, when I was running some magazines in the IT space back in the day. And so he's going to be on. He's going to be joined by Matt Crape, a Senior Technical Product Manager. Now, I've known Matt less time than I have known Rick, and which means about an hour now. But I've known Matt a bit online in the past. So we are delighted to have both of them here today. Can't wait to see their presentation. So, gentlemen, you have the floor now. Take it away.
Hello and welcome to this webcast. This is a great quick-fire topic about 10 easy best practices you can do to up your security game. I'm joined with one of my longtime Veeam adjacents, Matt Crape. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great today, Rick. I'm excited to talk about this. I mean, let's face it, the IT world's not getting any safer, right? Threats are abound out there, and security is a big thing. It's something that we all need to take part of these days. So, with that in mind, what are some quick and easy things that backup admins can do today to really help strengthen up their environment?
Yeah, and that's going to be what we talk about. So let's jump over to the slides straight away. And, first of all, I should highlight Matt and I both work at Veeam, but we're going to talk about some really just universal types of tips that can really help everyone out. So, Matt, I think we just jump right into it, and let's start with keeping attackers out. And, a really good zero trust approach would be a one-time password for multi-factor authentication. This is such an easy best practice to start with.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, in today's world, you could implement, OTP, MFA, wherever you need to, right? Whether it's on your Windows OS, a lot of applications themselves support it. And, as you know, with VBR12, we introduced the capability to frankly, easily enable this. It's pretty cool. It works in an offline fashion because, let's face it, a lot of folks don't put their VBR servers, with access to the outbound internet. At the end of the day, if you don't need outbound access, don't put it in place. So having MFA that works in these offline systems in that regard is fantastic as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think that really builds on one of the existing best practices we have here at Veeam, which is don't connect your backup infrastructure to the internet. And I think the whole industry would agree on that, because the Ransomware Trends report tells us that 93% of ransomware incidents, the attackers went after the backup infrastructure. So if you remove that control plane connectivity, you're really right away protecting the most effective way to get out of a problem when you think about ransomware. So step number one, I agree. MFA all the way, every day. That rhymes on Tuesday. Oh boy. Anyways, let's also take a look at the next recommendation you've got about a really popular topic, immutability. And there's a lot of immutability options out there today.
Oh boy, is there ever? So traditionally, we've had the 3-2-1 rule, which I'm sure most of us are familiar with, but you kind of had that one where it was, make sure it's offsite or air gapped, or ideally both, right? If you're not familiar with immutability, it's basically a way to not only prevent deletions, but prevent changes to the data. And that's critical. So obviously, if you can't delete it, it's safe from attackers trying to remove your backups. But if you can't alter it, it also means that it can't be, encrypted with some sort of ransomware. So you'd really want to make sure that you're leveraging immutability where it makes sense, right? And there's plenty of different ways that you could do this within Veeam. You could use cloud providers, S3 object storage, or you can also use the built-in Veeam hardened repository, right? Rick, I don't know if you want to touch on that.
Oh, yeah, this is something I personally, along with some of my colleagues across the product team, we've been working really diligently to really, dare I say, Matt, democratize immutability. So let me zoom into something right here. First of all, I want to highlight this option of making recent backups immutable for 7 days. There's really two very important things here. One, you can't turn it off. Okay, so yes, it's going to be immutable. But the second thing is, the minimum value you can put there is 7 days. So it's really a good window, and I think you can go up from there, but at a minimum, a week. And I want to highlight kind of a underground community thing we've been working on, and I'll highlight this URL here for a second, and then we'll go out and take a quick look. But we've also worked on automating the deployment of this. So the Veeam hardened repository is a Linux system with Veeam backups written on it, with immutable attributes, and a non-persistent user connection, what we call a single user account, single use account. And if you're not familiar with this, I would highly recommend you go to that URL. It's located over at community.veeam.com, and I still have this stickied at the top. So there's two different angles. One is I've walked through a YouTube video of how you can build from a standard Ubuntu installation a hardened repository, but also we have this new installable ISO approach with an automated hardening script. And this is really, really powerful. This actually hardens to a common defense standard for like a government defense implementation. I want to highlight that this is a different approach, which I've done in a separate video. But what's really cool about this, Matt, is after the completion of the hardening script, this system's mission in life basically takes a green pill and says, forever on, you're going to be a hardened repository. The only things that account can do, the root account afterwards, is do updates and reboot. So that's like super secure. All editions of Veeam work with that, including community editions. So I think that's a really powerful, really easy way to get an immutable copy on-prem. And you can do it with the backup copy job. You don't have to reconfigure everything on the network.
Yeah, what I really love about this specific repository is it's accessible to everyone, right? As you mentioned, you can run off of a Linux distribution, so you don't need any sort of specialized software or anything like that to really get going. Now, whenever I talk about immutability, I also like to toss out the tip of do the math, plan accordingly, right? When you write these things and you make them immutable, if you run out of storage, you can't just necessarily go in there and delete the backups, right? So make sure that you're doing the math, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud, and understand what it is that you're actually trying to achieve and how you're going to achieve it.
So you don't recommend 3,650 days of immutability?
Well, it depends. If I'm the cloud provider and you're paying me, sure.
Oh, yeah, sure. But again, I've seen people make very long immutable configurations and then they're very stuck. Okay, so that's the problem we're trying to avoid for sure. All right, let's talk about one of the basics of system administration, timeless problems, password rotation, password management, complex passwords. This is an easy one to improve for sure.
Oh, absolutely. So, any system administrator out there will know, ideally, you want to be using different service accounts for, different services. If you're running your backups under one account, it should only have the permissions required to back up that application. When you have multiple applications that you're backing up, think things like SQL Server, Oracle. Ideally, you probably even want to use separate accounts for each of those. So one gets compromised, nothing else is compromised. But it could be a real pain to manage these passwords, right? Rotating them, your security team's probably saying, hey, we need these changed every 90 days. They need to log into every system, figure out where it's used, update the passwords, and so forth. So there's this really cool construct called group managed service accounts. It's an Active Directory construct, and it's something that Veeam backup and replication can take advantage of as well. In a nutshell, what it does is it creates these super strong password accounts for you. 240 character passwords automatically rotated every 30 days. And Veeam can actually leverage these things to use these service accounts to perform tasks within the OSs of machines that we're backing up and protecting, all without the need for you, the admin, to actually go in there and manage anything. So it really takes the pain of password rotation. Frankly, it'll probably make your security team happy.
Oh, absolutely. And I'll add one step. I feel like we're going to talk about it here in a second. But also keep in mind, and we are talking about it here in a second, the same thing goes for encryption passwords, which are separate than credentials, right? Password manage these things like you would any critical authorization, right? And I think that that's a really good follow through for delegation and principal and roles assignment.
Absolutely. So these may sound similar, but they are a little bit different, right? So you want to follow the principle of least privilege, right? That's to say, give someone the least amount of roles and powers, privileges that they need to perform a task. So, with Veeam Backup Enterprise Manager, you can actually go in there and perform restores, for example, but you could add some delegation to that. You can add some scope to it, if you will. If all of a sudden you say to your help desk folks, yes, you can actually go in there and start recovering files from this file server, well, hopefully that's actually one less call that you'll get for a request to help out with a recovery.
What I like about this too, I'll zoom in a little bit, Matt, here, is like when those restores or options are presented right here, you'll see it can overwrite, keep, or just keep the permissions. But one thing I want to highlight is there's an optional configuration here in red of download the file. We could turn that off, which is actually really powerful, because if you wanted to, you could have this help desk operator role only the ability to put the files back where they came, and they wouldn't have the ability to download it or see the data, right? So again, some of these controls, Veeam is super flexible in this regard, right? And I think that if you think about the most mundane thing of a file recovery or even some whole VM or folder type recoveries, that is a candidate task to offload to the help desk. I discussed with one organization about, actually, they trusted the receptionist to do file level recoveries with the, it was at an edge location, but without the download enabled. And it was one of those things that the time zones were just so off. The individual may or may not have been tired of being on call, but I think it's important.
Two other quick points just before we move forward there is, one, you can also use this for databases, right? You'll see in that background there, we got mailbox items, we got things like SQL servers. So even if you as the backup admin want to delegate this to a database admin, you could give them that power. They might be the ones who say, hey, you know what? We need to check the data from 3 hours ago or something like that. And the other point that I was going to make is that permissions only restore. That thing is so valuable, especially when we're talking about file servers. So often folks might go in there and change permissions on the file and cascade it down and hit cancel, and you don't necessarily know where that might have stopped. You can do things like permissions restore, whether through Enterprise Manager or the VBR console, to just restore the permissions to the file. Extremely valuable for those cases where you just need that little bit of control.
Yeah, that's really a super important point. I mean, Veeam is such a big platform now with applications like databases, physical servers, virtual machines, file, unstructured data, the cloud. These types of principles going across those different data types is really, really important. Here's one of my favorite. So Matt, I'm a collection of one-liners, but I really want you to go through this, and then I'll see if you hit my favorite point on encryption.
Yes. So encryption, right? We're talking about the kind that you do yourself. Really what you should be doing is figuring out, do you have any sort of compliance, security mandates, anything like that that says your data needs to be encrypted, right? And it's not just a matter of checking off that checkbox to say, yes, our data is encrypted at rest, our backup files. Think about things like the transport as well. As it's going across the network, is that data encrypted? Now, why do we care about that encryption, right? The encryption that you're assigning to it? Well, in the event that data is compromised or exfiltrated, you want to know that somebody can't get into the data itself. Now, we talked about immutability earlier, which will prevent someone from deleting the data. It doesn't necessarily prevent someone from copying the data out. So if an attacker is able to get onto the network and copy your data out, if those backups are not encrypted, there's a chance they can still get into that data, which is really where the encryption becomes very important.
Oh, I think that's a very good point, because if it's immutable, it doesn't mean you can't read it. It absolutely means you can read it. I have an additional couple of points of view. I grew up in IT, Matt, thinking that, hey, if data leaves my building, I need to encrypt it because I don't want a tape falling off the truck with all the credit card numbers on it, things like that. But nowadays with the cloud and different other environments, it's kind of a cheeky comment, but I'll say this. I recommend that everyone encrypt your backup data in the cloud, or someone else will do it for you. Now, what I mean by that is once it leaves your control, it still needs to be in your control. You can't control the cloud. You can manage it, but you can't control it. But when you put your data in the cloud, if you have your own encryption password in play, that's a very good way to confidently use the cloud to solve the 3-2-1 rule and all these other things. What I want to draw your attention to is that when Veeam makes these password loss enabled type passwords on backups on disk, this is super helpful. If you have ever lost a password, Enterprise Manager can basically re-access the data as an imported backup. This is super helpful, especially if you're dealing with a smoking hole, fire, flood, and blood, ransomware type of situation where you have the backup data in a bucket in the cloud, you have the Enterprise Manager, and with Enterprise Manager, you can basically present that data back for recovery. Now, one step further, what if Enterprise Manager is also compromised? I think back to the previous advice of rotating credentials and things like that, we should rotate the passwords and store them in a vault out of band as well. I think that is a best practice, but I think it's super important to have the backup data encrypted. And Matt, I'm talking to some people nowadays that are encrypting on their first stop on premises as well. So every backup copy is encrypted. And it was an interesting angle, but the thought was, well, what's the quickest way to exfiltrate data? It's to take the backup home, right? So again, you kind of have to make it not usable should it leave your full control. Good stuff, good stuff. All right. Next tip is looking for those suspicious individuals. This is an interesting set of advice here. How would you recommend looking for suspicious activity?
Yeah, absolutely. So that first point, right? An authorized user does not equate authorized action. Somebody's password could be compromised, right? That account is authorized to do these things, but the action itself is not actually authorized because it's an outside threat, right? So look for things, you can use Veeam1 for this to find things that just don't seem to add up, right? It's not to say that all suspicious activity is, malicious, but you need to start looking. So look at things like, hey, what's been changed? What time of day has this been changed? Is somebody coming in, logging in on the VPN or whatever, making changes late at night? Maybe the Friday night of a long weekend, holidays coming up, those traditional times where we've seen attackers come in because, frankly, either the admins are asleep or it's a long weekend, nobody's thinking about work. So make sure that you kind of review these things fairly routinely.
So I have a good little pivot point here, Matt. So this top VMs with changes, your lab is my lab. And so we both know the behavior of this. I can tell you a couple of things right away. The most number of changes comes from a VMware backup proxy. Why? This particular system's doing a lot of vSphere API for data protection calls like hot add, those types of manipulations. I look through, and again, we have good nomenclature. I know that these are all BNR systems. Actually, the SQL system is surprisingly high. I think it comes down to change rate and hot add. That one probably is my highest change rate, which is why there's a lot of changes there. The other thing that sticks out to me, if I look at who have done so many of these changes, I know, again, your lab is my lab. I can tell you right away, I'm probably using my own account versus a service account to do the backups. If this was called service.backup, that would be a little bit cleaner. So I think I've got some homework. But when you have an environment, and then coupling that with the time of day, it should match the backup window. But you should actually right away know those types of things about your environment. And I'll go one step further on Veeam1. I guarantee you it'll tell you something about your environment that you didn't know, but you need to address, AKA, I need to set up a service account. So I think, now we're going to zoom into it. I forgot about the build here. So what are these types of things? These are some hardware sensor stuff. This is pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So that's a great point, is that Veeam1's not just about monitoring for vSphere or anything like that, right? It really is about monitoring your environment. So one of the things that I was going to touch on that you kind of touched on there, Rick, is you can also use this to find configuration issues, right? How come that VM has so many configuration changes, maybe when it's not a proxy, right? If it's just a run-of-the-mill file server, or as you mentioned, SQL server, you're able to kind of quickly spot these things to start that investigation, right? It might turn out to be benign and not a big deal, or it might turn out to be, hey, something weird's going on here. So don't just dismiss things. We're all used to alert fatigue, but we have them configured for a reason.
Yeah, good shout on Veeam1. Even the free edition, you can look at your top VMs. I always find, there's somebody with that snapshot now again open. Or why is this one pegged at 100% CPU for a week? These are not things that you would expect. So again, Veeam1's really good at giving you some of those types of data points, but also looking for things before they're a problem. I think early indicators, Veeam1 can help out here as well.
Yes, absolutely. So this is one of my favorite alerts that you can configure within Veeam1, right? Really what it does is it looks for changes in your backup file size. Now you might say, meh, whatever. But why would you care about this? Well, for one, let's say somebody's doing something malicious and they opt to delete a bunch of data, right? You might find all of a sudden, yeah, you know what, this file size doesn't seem right. Or similarly, if ransomware gets a hold of it and starts encrypting things, that's going to create new files on the server, which will result in a larger backup. So, and there might be other reasons as well. Maybe somebody copied their entire family vacation videos or photos up to the server and you want to get that stuff off. At the end of the day, it's another data point that you should be monitoring. What I like is that you can really fine tune what your thresholds are, right? How far back do you want to analyze? How much of a change rate are you looking for? But the other thing to note is that sometimes attackers might go in there and actually remove VMs from jobs or workloads from any sort of jobs. And all of a sudden you're saying, hey, how come this backup job isn't, as big as it has been traditionally? That's why I call it destruction by omission, right? So the job was still complete successfully, but it's just not backing up what you think it's backing up. Right? And it's as per the bottom point there, right? Combine it with that no backup report to figure out, hey, you know what? I thought this backup was supposed to, or this VM was supposed to be backed up, but it's not actually part of any job.
Yeah, that's actually super important. There's so many good things to unpack here. So the system with no backup is a really important report. So really, ideally, everything is backed up. But I think what's also intriguing here is the job configuration tracking. So I'm going to think about not just malicious administrator, but honestly, operator error. Who is doing the administrators, right? You'll see that a lot of these are done through different usernames, and it should maybe make sense that one account is doing the most of them. But what I get really concerned about is if an account that I'm not expecting is doing a lot of the manipulations, right? That's also a red flag. And, if I look through the reports in VM1, they're very, very good information. We just have to scope it to the ones that I think that matter, like job configuration tracking is a very big one, maybe turning off immutability, things like that, disabling a backup job. This visibility is really important. And then when you have that visibility, then you can get into kind of some of the different indicators here. Ransomware is almost unavoidable in the different conversations, but when you have that, we have to do something with that information.
Absolutely, right? And this might sound silly, but figure out who needs to be notified when there is ransomware activity going on, right? Backup admins probably want to know about it. Security team definitely wants to know about it. How about the business owner, the application owner? Do they need to know about this? So figure out who really needs to know about this as early on as possible. And what's your plan? Are you going to take a snapshot right away to try to minimize damage? Go run a quick VM backup if it's running in the VM. What's your step two, right? Okay, you've been notified. Now what? So this report here, this alarm here, yeah, it's pretty cool how functional it is and the different things that you could do, right? You could send out alerts to distribution lists, or you can even run the script. Maybe you want to say something like, you know what, disconnect the network card, or once again, connect to the vSphere API and trigger a snapshot, disconnect the network card and fire off an alert, right? All sorts of customization can actually really go into it. Now, one of the cool things, if you want to just advance it there quickly, Rick, is you can customize the thresholds once again. So if you have different workloads, say you've got a database server that's always running heavy, you could create a copy of this alarm and scope it just for that workload and say, yeah, you know what? Most of the time it's running at about 85%. So let me know when it's running over 90%. Or on the flip side, if you have, once again, that trusty old file server that's barely using any CPU cycles, if it hits 20%, fire off an alert. So it's not just CPU usage. We also look at the data store write rate, because once again, encryption, right? You're writing lots of data to the disk. And similarly, you can also monitor for network transmission. Is someone actually trying to exfiltrate that data as well, right? So lots of things that we can monitor for and alert on.
This is super important, Matt. This is an OR, first of all, because the OR, it's doing the network in addition to the disk and CPU above, which would be an and. Those are really, really powerful. I've even debriefed of scenarios where Veeam support has had this particular one trigger, but the customer just had it sitting there yellow for a couple of days. So to the previous point, so I recognize this alarm very specifically. This is the possible ransomware activity. At a minimum, have this go to email, run a script, and maybe even some actions. If it's a scope it to a dev resource and maybe turn it off. I've talked to some orgs that do that. But just get this information to the right place. Possible ransomware activity. Super good stuff. And I think all of this is related to having a plan. And I know where you're going with this one, but what were you thinking with planning for the worst?
Absolutely. You want to have a plan in place before things break. Plain and simple, right? And one of the keys to that is having good, proper, up-to-date documentation. Who loves updating or writing documentation? Probably nobody. Maybe lawyers, right? Because they get paid by the hour for that. But realistically, a lot of us IT folks, it's the bane of our existence. Why? Because it's time consuming, and frankly, because it changes so often. So if you're not familiar with the Veeam Recovery Orchestrator, it's able to do a lot of the stuff for you. You could go in there, you can actually build out a recovery plan and lots of other stuff, like do testing, figure out what the recovery actually looks like and to where. But one of the real jewels in there, as far as I'm concerned, is the ability to automatically create this documentation. So why do you care about this? Well, you can export it as a Word doc, PDF, you can print it off, and you know exactly what's going on. But if you also work with any sort of change advisory board or anything like that, or you require this for compliance reasons, this will do the job for you, right? It'll take all that heartache, heartburn out of the job of creating this documentation and making sure that it's accurate and up to date, and just turns into a click of a button.
Yeah, I talk to a lot of organizations who really feel like the Orchestrator product solves a big business problem. And to your point right here, I like to say, this is version 2 stuff, okay? But what I mean by this is that the version 2 of the Orchestrator product had the ability to test and validate daily the RTO and RPO, which solves a big problem. What does day 1 look like? Great, everything's set up, everything's working. But we've got 10% change rate, application scale, and come and go. What does day 94 look like? Maybe that's the day that we go from 1 hour RTO to 1 hour and 5 minutes RTO. And that is when the stakeholders will start to, have a disagreement, a misalignment. And the reality is Veeam can scale up, scale down, no problem. It's just a matter of knowing where to scale and when it's quote unquote tipped over the thresholds. Love this. Really, really powerful. And you can take in some of the there it is right there. Target RPO is 24 hours and restore point age looks like over that. That's the worst. Okay, that's an example of the worst RPO failure. But that tells me that something wasn't backed up, where therefore its recovery would be really at risk due to RPO, right? So this level of visibility is super, super powerful.
And what's really important about this is when we say prove your RPO and your RTO, you're actually proving it because it's going through and running these plans in a sandboxed environment. So it's not some sort of magical, if statement that, what if we do this? No, it's actually running it in the background so you know what these numbers actually are. So you can really prove it to your management, to your leadership that, yes, we're able to hit these targets. Or, Rick, as per your point, maybe no, we can't, right? What can we do to change what's required in order to hit these targets?
Exactly. Or auditors. That's another example. Mm-hmm. Big important thing also around the Orchestrator is the ransomware scan. This is brilliant. So if we go through a recovery, we're not going to reintroduce a threat. Love this option. This is just a no-brainer, I think, as well.
It is. It is. And it's something that, unfortunately, a lot of organizations may not think about until it's too late, right? Ransomware got into your network somehow, or some sort of persistent threat. Cool, you fail over, you start doing the restores. You want to ensure that you're just not going to reintroduce that threat, right? How do you do that? Well, you could basically leverage Veeam Secure Restore and start performing a malware scan as part of the restore process. Now, what's really cool is if, hey, you know what, something malicious is found, it'll automatically roll over if you choose to the next one, right? And scan that recovery point. Or maybe you might say, you know what, we really need the data off there. We need to grab a few files, perform the restore, even though that we know it's compromised, but just don't connect it to the network, right? So then you might be able to go in there and leverage the console or something similar to check out data.
Yeah, well, especially root cause. If you do determine, okay, this is the last infected point, maybe we want to get into it. So much flexibility here, so many options. We are getting short on time. Whew, a lot to go through. Thank you so much, Matt, for filling this out and building this content. But we really also want everyone to know there's an incredible library of Veeam content out there, from the YouTube to Veeam University. We've got user groups, the community hub. We've got the hands-on labs. Now, that's pretty cool. People can do live demos of our products, I believe. So any favorites you want to highlight here?
Oh, I love the hands-on labs because you're able to go in there, we give you a script that you can work off of, or you could go off on your own, choose your own adventure, right? But at the end of the day, everything on here is really about, enablement. The first two really about connecting with others in the Veeam community, and just really, trying to make everyone, put them in a better position going forward.
Indeed, indeed. Well, hey, Matt, thank you so much for helping me deliver this content. You made all of it. I just added a few bits, so it's all you. And a big thanks to our production team that have helped produce and bring this content to you, Global Marketing and more, as well as some of our partner organizations. Thanks for watching, and that concludes today's webinar.
Okay. Wow, guys, that was so much fun. Thanks, Rick and Matt, for putting together a fantastic presentation. So much great information. Thank you, Matt, for your insights in the Q&A, for answering all of those questions. We appreciate your time today so much. It's been a delight to have you on. Now, I want to mention for everyone that any questions that they didn't get to today, they will follow up on. So if your question didn't get answered, don't worry, have no fear, don't sweat, all of those things. You will get an answer. Veeam will follow up with you on that to answer any and all questions that did come in during the event today. And with that, folks, we're getting near the end of the event. But before we wrap up, we do have one more piece of business, and that is the Amazon gift card prize drawing. As I mentioned at the beginning, you have to be present for the entire event to be eligible to win. And the winner of today's $250 card is Sunny Lee from California. What a great name. Sunny Lee. Congratulations to you, Sunny. We'll be in touch ASAP to get you that card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Veeam for making this event possible. And I want to thank all of you attendees for being on with us, for your great questions, for your responses today. And thanks for spending part of your day with us. That concludes today's event. Get out there and start your Christmas shopping if you haven't already. Have a great rest of your day, folks.